Hello, 4th grade. Today we're going to be talking about the deep part of the ocean, down in what is known as the midnight zone. There's lots of really weird creatures that live down there, and the ecosystem is entirely different than what we're used to. So I hope that you will enjoy our journey down to the bottom of the ocean. So we know that the ocean covers most of the Earth, and we have talked about some of the shallower parts of the ocean. We've talked about the coast, so like the swash zone and the beach and everything. And we also talked a little bit about coral reefs, which are also usually pretty shallow. They're all where there's light hitting them. They're not in the dark. But today we're going to be going down deep to the opposite end of the ocean, down very, very, very far. So here's a diagram to help you see what these different zones in the ocean are. The first zone is the sunlight zone, and this is the nice happy zone. It's nice and warm, and it's what we're used to thinking of when we think of the ocean. And it's near the surface, so it gets lots of light. As you go farther down into the water, the light will start to become less and less because the water is kind of blocking some of the light. So the sunlight zone is about 200 meters deep. So it's just that very thin layer at the very top of the ocean, 200 meters right there. And I think right here you can actually see little Eiffel towers stacked on top of each other to give you an idea of how deep we're going. So after you get past 200 meters, the light starts to get a bit dimmer, and that's what's called the twilight zone. So it's not quite pitch black. You can still see, but it's not a lot of light getting to that part of the ocean. And then if you go down farther from the twilight zone, you get into what's called the midnight zone. So that's after you go about 1,000 meters deep. So that's a whole kilometer deep. We're down in the midnight zone. And that's where lots of really weird creatures live. And the ocean actually gets very, very deep. At its deepest point in the Mariana Trench, which is in the Pacific Ocean, in a specific place called the Challenger Deep, it gets 36,200 feet deep, which is very deep. That's approaching 7 miles. If there's 5,280 feet in a mile, 36,000 would be up around 7 miles. So that's a very deep ocean. There's a lot of water between the surface and its deepest point. But we're not going to be talking about that deep of a place right now. We're going to be talking about just the general midnight zone, not that like deep abyss area. Although there's plenty of interesting things happening there as well. So we have our sunlight zone, the twilight zone, and the midnight zone. Now, let's talk about some characteristics of this zone. So what's it like there? When we get down to that place, the first and most obvious thing is that there's no light there. So this means that if there's anything that's going to be seen, the light has to be made by the creatures themselves in what is called bioluminescence. And we'll talk about that in a few slides here. So there's no light down there. Pitch black. The second characteristic is that it's very high pressure. So you know how when you go and swim to the bottom of a swimming pool, your ears start to hurt a little bit, and that's because all the weight of the water on top of you is actually kind of pushing on your ears and makes them hurt. So I want you to picture that you have several miles of water on top of you. That's just how much pressure that these creatures are going to have to deal with that live down there. And in fact, the pressure there, it gets down to be about 5,850 pounds per square inch. So on every square inch of your body down there, you're going to have nearly 6,000 pounds of pressure. And so these creatures have to be very specially designed to live down there. And it also means that when you bring them back up in the low pressure waters, they don't do as well. They're used to that high pressure. The third thing is that it gets very cold down there. Even though it might be like near the equator, when you get really deep and there's no light reaching down there, that water is going to be very cold. In fact, it's in the 30s Fahrenheit, so like say 36 degrees Fahrenheit, almost freezing. Although it wouldn't freeze down there because it's salt water, but it gets near freezing temperatures down there. So very, very cold, no light, and very high pressure. So let's talk about some of the creatures that live down there, and let's talk about their bioluminescence. So that's probably the most notable thing about the creatures that live down in the deep, is that they can actually make their own light. And here's an example of a few animals that can make their own light. Now, the word bioluminescence is a very big, sciencey sounding word, but if you look at where the word comes from, you'll be able to see. So bio, like biology or biography, means life. So we're talking about life something here. And then the word luminesce, think about the word illuminate, like to light something up. So life, lighting up. So luminesce means lighting up, and bioluminescence would be life lighting up. So a firefly would be an example of bioluminescence. But of course, we're talking about the bioluminescence down in the deep parts of the ocean. Now, you might wonder, like, why do these creatures glow? What purpose is there? And, I mean, part of it is just for God's glory, I'm sure, but they also have practical purposes for their own survival as well. So, having light down there enables them to communicate with other creatures of their same species. So say you're a little fish down there, and you're looking for a girlfriend, and it's dark, and it's cold, and it's just empty. If you can make little light signals, you might be able to have a chance at finding one, and that'll help significantly. They also use scent and some other things to help them find others of their same species. So that is one purpose of the bioluminescence. But there's far more purposes than just that. Other purposes are going to be avoiding danger, so avoiding predators. So there's some shrimp and squid down there that when a predator comes near them or they get startled, they'll actually release a lot of bioluminescence into the water. So they'll kind of release a glowy fluid into the water, and that'll make this almost like glowing cloud. And that'll distract the predators long enough for them to get away. Kind of like how an octopus will squirt its ink and then swim away while the predator is confused. So, avoiding predators is another way that they use light. And then, of course, as well, predators can use that same trick to attract their prey. So the anglerfish is a classic example of this, and we'll talk about it, but they can actually use the light almost like a lure to draw the fish in, or whatever their snack is going to be, and that will enable them to pull all the fish in towards themselves that they want to eat, rather than going out and trying to hunt. Now, down there in the dark, there's actually a ton of life. There's a whole lot of different creatures, and pretty much every time we send people down there, or send robots and submarines down there to explore, we come back with new creatures and all sorts of new discoveries. So there's a whole lot to be learned about here still. But also down there, being so cold and black and empty, it can feel very like slow and empty, like there's not much happening there. So like the fish down there oftentimes are very kind of slow fish that just kind of float around. Actually, not just fish, all the creatures like to just kind of float around there. They don't really spend a lot of energy because it might be a long time before they actually can get their next meal. So that's one characteristic of things down there, apart from just glowing, is that they're often very kind of slow drifting creatures. They aren't as active as we tend to think of things near the surface. It's just an interesting little characteristic. Also, I think some of the creatures can live a long time because they have such a slow metabolism and everything, but more on that some other time. So, I have a cool video of bioluminescence for you. This is actually a video of dolphins swimming through bioluminescent plankton. So remember, plankton are very, very tiny creatures that are kind of the foundation of the ecosystem in lots of marine environments. And this is not down in the midnight zone. This is probably up near the surface. But there are, sometimes you can get like a bay that has a bunch of plankton in it, that when you stir the water, those plankton glow. And so whenever something swims through the water, kind of you have this glowing, you can see it, the glowing glowiness around whatever's swimming through it. And there's some of these bays you can actually go and visit yourself and go swimming in it, and like the water around you will glow as you push through it. Or you can go kayaking through it, and your kayak will glow as it moves through the water. So this is just one of those really, really cool little gifts that God has given us in this world of His. So enjoy the beauty of that. Now, I thought it would take some time to just talk about a few, like just 3, of the types of creatures that live down there. And this very adorable big-mouthed fellow with a funny antenna is an anglerfish. And what's funny is an angler is a fisherman, so angler is another word for fisherman. It's just kind of a fisherman fish. And the way the fisherman fish works, or the angler fish, is he uses light to draw in his prey towards himself. So you see that little bulb at the end of his little stick on top of his head? He uses that kind of like a fishing lure to attract prey. It'll glow, and the fish will come and kind of be mesmerized by it. And then when they get close enough, he'll use his giant mouth and gulp them up. And they actually have expandable stomachs too, so they can eat very, very big things, even though they're pretty tiny fish. So that is the anglerfish, probably one of the most well-known fish that lives in the deep. Actually, if you've seen Finding Nemo, the fish that they encounter down in the dark part of the ocean is an anglerfish. He has a little glowy bulb, and Dory and Marlin get attracted to it and almost get eaten. Another type of fish that you're going to find down here are jellyfish, and sometimes they will bioluminesce as well to make their own light. And actually, the reason jellyfish will make their own light is usually in defense. Like, they will use it to protect themselves. So some of them actually release that glowy fluid into the water to confuse predators. But interestingly enough, other ways that they use it to defend themselves is sometimes if a predator will run into the jellyfish, they'll actually kind of release a glowing slime onto the predator, and then all of a sudden that predator is a target for all of its predators. So it's kind of not a very good deal to eat the fish if it's going to make, or the jellyfish if it's going to make you glow and make you kind of a sitting duck for all of your predators. So it's just kind of a very interesting way that they use bioluminescence to protect themselves. But jellyfish, they kind of drift through the water, and some of them actually will move. They kind of have that kind of motion, that swimming motion that you've probably seen before. And they have these tentacles. Some of them have really, really long tentacles, and they just kind of wait for tiny creatures to come and get caught in the tentacles, and the tentacles will sting them, and they'll bring them up to the mouth, which is right in here, and they'll eat them. Jellyfish actually are animals. They move, and they have mouths, and they need to eat. They're just very different animals than we are. A third kind of animal that lives down there, another famous one, is the squid. And there's lots of types of squid. There's giant squid, tiny squid, all sorts of squid. But here's a bioluminescent squid. You can see all these little marks on it where it's glowing. And you can't actually see the squid's body, but right here there's going to be an eye. On the other side there's another eye. This is its kind of cone-shaped head thing. And down here are its tentacles. So you can kind of picture a squid on there. Yeah, but the squid, they will travel around, and they'll swim around, and they'll actually hunt. They're predators. Pretty much all of the fish down in the deep part of the ocean are either going to be predators or scavengers, which means they either go and hunt their food, or they go and find dead things and just eat those, kind of like a vulture would. The reason for that is there are no plants down there. There's no light down there, so there can't be any photosynthesis. So up here in the sunlight, where it's all bright and happy, we have plants that use the sunlight to make their own food, and they put that energy into, say, an apple, and then we eat that, and we can get that energy. But down there, because there isn't any sunlight, there's no photosynthesis happening. So everything down there has to eat other creatures, as opposed to eating, or as opposed to using light to make their own food. So lots of times, like, say there's a whale up at the surface and it dies and it sinks down to the bottom, there's lots of tiny creatures that'll eat that up, and then other creatures will eat those creatures, and that's kind of how the nutrients get cycled into this very strange ecosystem. And what's interesting too is lots of creatures, such as the squid here, will then at night come up out of the midnight zone to hunt. So they actually kind of rise up when night comes because they're used to the dark. And they'll hunt around, and when day comes, actually go back down into the midnight zone. And so that can bring some of those nutrients back up, potentially, if they get hunted as well. So it's a very interesting ecosystem that we have going on here. I'm trying to think if I had anything else I wanted to share with you about that. Anyways, squid are wonderful, especially bioluminescent squid. I also have a video that you should be able to find in the homework notes on the RenWeb page for this day. And it'll show you several of the different kinds of creatures that live in the deep that come up, and just enjoy them, because they're very weird, creepy creatures, but they're especially designed to be able to live in this different sort of environment. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that is hydrothermal vents, which those are basically underwater volcano-like things where there's geothermal activity going on. So there's volcanoes are kind of something down at the very bottom of the ocean, and it's releasing really hot, nutrient-filled water. There actually can be some creatures that live, and they get their energy from that hydrothermal vent. So when I said everything's a scavenger or a predator, there are some creatures that can kind of use these other things to get their nutrients and energy. But there's no photosynthesis anyways. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed that video. Lots of very beautiful things, especially if you go down there and turn out all the lights. Then they're especially beautiful. When you turn the lights on some of these creatures, they can look very ugly. And that's because they have no need to be very beautiful because they're used to living in the dark. Lots of the creatures that live down there are blind because they have no need for light, although many of them do have eyes, very big eyes, to look for bioluminescence as well. Anyways, I'm starting to ramble, but I will end this lesson here, and I hope that you all have a happy Tuesday. All right, see ya.